All right, so I really appreciate everyone coming out again for our second ever LSAT office hours. I mean, obviously this one's a lot more serious than last week's missing premise drills, right? Because this is for November takers who are taking the LSAT a week from Monday. And so, as I mentioned in the email, we're going to do something really different this time around, where we're going to actually have an office hours bonanza. And so we're going to start today with me. I'm just going to be here for general advice and guidance down the stretch. So anything you guys have about how to best spend, these last, handful of days, any last minute questions, tips, strategies, that's what I'm here for. Starting tomorrow, we're going to do 2 office hour sessions per day, but they're going to be on specific sections. So tomorrow, I believe the morning session is going to be logical reasoning with Ravi. For those of you who don't know Ravi is one of our LSAT instructors, private tutors, scored a 180. So he'll be going over logical reasoning. And then in the evening, we have Andrea doing reading comprehension. And so we're going to do the same thing. We'll send out the invitations via email and text. Probably about an hour before the events. I will send today as well, by the end of the day, just the next handful of office hours and their times, just so you guys have advance notice. But I hope you guys find this stuff super useful. Obviously, I know, LSATMax is a remote learning process. And one of the things we really pride ourselves on is trying to make sure that you guys have access to support when you need it. And so hopefully these office hour sessions do provide the last minute push that you need to get over the hump. And so again, it's going to be 2 per day starting tomorrow until Saturday the 23rd. And obviously we will try to make them all available for replay as well for people who can't join. Although I am not quite sure how that's going to work. So if you can join, please do. And with that, let's dive right in. So obviously, I think one thing I just want to emphasize very quickly here is the importance of not burning yourself out, right? And so I think I would take my last full-length simulated LSAT this Monday, and then what I would suggest is the rest of that time. You definitely want to continue to practice under time pressure, right? But really focus on the practice and review schedule that we set forth in the course, right? The idea being, let's focus on individual sections under the time pressure as opposed to full-length LSATs to ensure that by the time the real exam rolls around on Monday, we do not have mashed potatoes for brains, right? It's not going to be beneficial to you. Now, I think another thing that's important to talk about is, trying to remain calm. And I obviously realize that that's easier said than done. But again, remember, listen, they don't average LSAT scores anymore. We still have January for those of us who are applying this year. I know it's not ideal. It's, I'm aware of rolling admissions. I totally get it. But again, I think just keeping these things in mind will help you remain calm, right? And really think about November as, an opportunity to do your best. And again, I realize that it is a lot easier said than done, but I think just trying to put it in perspective, right, is really important. I think the other thing to remember is you've seen everything before, right? The likelihood of you encountering something that you've never seen before is slim to none. Even if you look at the September exam that everyone was really upset about with the logic games, again, those games have existed in the past. I mean, obviously they're rare, but they have appeared. And the other thing to remember is you can also look at the September exam and see how forgiving the curve was, right? Because of that difficult game. So, I think, it's always important to remember that if you do encounter stuff that's really, really challenging, everybody's encountering that same exam, right? And so hopefully the curve will balance it out. I think other things that to keep in mind, if you are near your testing center and you haven't been able to go over there yet, I would highly recommend, one of these days taking a drive over there just to make sure you can find the location, find the exact, room, just so you know where you are going on the day of your LSAT so you don't have any issues there. And then the other thing that I do want to recommend is something that I found really beneficial the morning of my exam. And what I did was I just took a couple of toss-up logical reasoning questions. And again, I can't stress that enough, right? I'm not asking you to take some really challenging LSAT questions, expose yourself to those the morning of your LSAT to freak yourself out, right? That's not the idea here. The idea here is by looking at some really easy practice questions before you walk into the testing center, right? Your mind gets into LSAT taking mode before you see a real question, right? You don't want the first question you see that morning to be an actual question on your LSAT, right? Your brain's going to take some time to warm up, right? So I found that to be extremely beneficial. Definitely something to take advantage of. And then last thing before we dive into your questions here, I think, please guys, the importance of being comfortable with the digital LSAT cannot be understated, right? And remember that, as of October, we had some changes that are obviously going to still be present for November, where now we can have the tablet in any location. It's no longer going to be limited in terms of where you can, how you can set up your tablet on your desk. And then obviously, we know about the stronger scratch paper that they're providing now. And again, just remember, just because it's a digital LSAT, right, doesn't mean you can't take items into the testing center, right? Remember that you actually still want to bring pencils, right? We're going to be working out logic games on the scratch paper. So you definitely want to make sure you have those materials. Remember though, you cannot bring highlighters anymore, right? So just something to keep in mind. The highlighting now is done with the digital LSAT. You can't bring a highlighter in, but again, you can't bring pencils, you can't bring eraser. And so definitely don't forget about that. Can you bring gum? I'm assuming the answer to that question is no, but let me just confirm that. Yeah, I'm assuming no, because the rule, you can have a beverage and a snack. It doesn't say anything about gum. So my gut would tell me no, particularly because they don't want people smacking on gum and distracting other students, right? So I would lean towards, probably gum will not be, even if it was permitted in the testing center, the idea of you being able to chew it during the exam, I'm not sure how that would work. All right, so that's really all I wanted to go over with you guys, at least for now. So what I want to do is just open it up for questions that you guys can start to fire away. You can obviously chat it, or you can unmute yourself and talk it if you prefer. Yeah, so exactly. So Zella, that's exactly correct, right? So what's going to be happening, right, is you're going to be answering the questions on a tablet. And what I can actually do here, so everyone can kind of see what it looks like, and we can actually look at both very easily. So I think this is obviously really important to be super comfortable with. So let's go into LSATMax. Okay, great. Screen is being shared. And so this is really what the digital LSAT looks like. And so, everything in terms of answering questions is happening on the tablet. But you're correct. Your work is actually going to be taking place on the scratch paper, which really is for logic games. Because you still have the underline and highlight ability. And I think for logical reasoning, obviously when it's an argument, one of the things that we really stress is the importance of, pausing and breaking that argument down. Something that I did when I took a paper pencil LSAT was I would underline the conclusion every time. And I think that's something that you definitely want to continue to do even in the digital world. And again, that's the idea of the stylus that they're giving you. And I do want to emphasize a couple of things about that. But so this is what the exam basically looks like. And actually you can see, so you have the navigation bar at the bottom. You have the ability to eliminate incorrect answer choices, right? Which is the minus sign to the right of the answer choice. And then obviously when you eliminate it, it turns to a plus, which allows you to bring it back, right? You have the question flagging, which again, just allows you to remember questions that you want to come back to. You have the timer, brightness, spacing between the lines, font size, eraser, highlighters, and then the underline, right? Now, let's take a look at what the actual LSAT looks like by just going to LSAT, right? And you'll see that it is very similar other than, where's digital LSAT? Okay, cool. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, right, these are available for free on LSAT's website. So great things if you haven't taken advantage of them yet. So if you wanted to just get a sense, here we go. So we started, and you see it's very similar, just the UI is different, right? But you see the incorrect answer choice elimination, right? And then you tap it to bring it back, right? Same idea with the question flagging, right? You see the timer, you see the highlighters, right? Now, just something to be aware of, guys, when you're trying to highlight on the digital LSAT, it's really important that you are pressing and exerting pressure, right? Because if you don't, it's not going to pick it up. And LSAT doesn't seem like it's working, but okay, I'm not quite sure. Never really used theirs before, but if you guys wanted to see in our world, just remember that rubbing your finger is not enough, right? What you want to do is you want to be able to tap, right? Exert pressure, and then see that? And so there's an example of me underlining the conclusion, right? So yes, so definitely things to be aware of. And sorry, I see some more chats coming in here. Let me move this over so I can see it. Okay, great. Well, yeah, so I just tried to highlight on theirs, and yeah, I did have issues. I'm not quite sure why. But again, I mean, this is a web browser, but I mean, I should be able to, let me try it one more time. I should be able to highlight it, but it doesn't seem like it's working on their site. But I don't think obviously that's going to be the case with the LSAT. In terms of highlighting on the logic games, it's the same idea. You can basically highlight any of the text, right? So anything that's text, you're going to be able to highlight. So you can highlight the conditions, right? You can highlight parts of the question, right? Okay, so moving along here from Michael, let's see. So the question from Michael is, can you please share with us some classic point grabbing strategies you found effective under time pressure? I know some people only attempt 2 or 3 logic games and don't bother with others, but do you have any clear strategies for what to do with logical reasoning, reading comp? I find myself wasting time during logical reasoning and reading comp, then getting them wrong on my score review. So I was beginning to think, why bother in the first place? Perhaps I should just have focused on other questions, or is this all flawed thinking? No, Michael, I think the way you're thinking about it is absolutely the right way to think about it, right? And so I think the idea there is you kind of want to, it's really important for you to think about what your target score is and how you are planning to achieve your target score, because then we can see what we can and can't do in terms of this regard. So for example, for myself, right, my dream was breaking 170, and I came up with a roadmap that I thought would be realistic for me to achieve that. And that roadmap was, perfect on games, 2 to 3 on logical reasoning, 3 to 4 on reading comp for a maximum wrong of 10, right? Now, obviously, if you have a lower target score, you have more flexibility. And I think, some of the really nice, point grabbing strategies is particularly in logical reasoning. And this was something that we've always recommended, but now that it's a digital exam, we can even recommend it more, because my concern that I used to have in the past was by recommending that you jump questions, you leave open the possibility of bubbling errors on the paper pencil exam. Thankfully, in the digital world, we don't have that anymore, right? So you know that they love to give you flawed parallel questions, parallel reasoning questions at the end of the logical reasoning section, right? 23, 24. They do that on purpose, right? What they're doing is They know those are time trap questions. They know they're challenging questions. So what they're doing is they're slowing you down, right, to prevent you from first getting that question correct, but then slowing you down so much that you don't even have the time to get to the questions behind it, right? And I think so that's really important as you think about how to maximize the number of questions correct. So what I would suggest is when you encounter that flawed parallel or parallel reasoning question at the end of the logical reasoning section, jump it, do the questions behind it because they're worth the same exact points, right? And all we care about is maximizing the number of questions we get correct. And so that's a great strategy. Now, obviously, same idea with games, right? Now, if you can afford, to, not do all the games and achieve your target score, then sure, right? If you see a game, and again, in my opinion, same idea. I feel that for the most part, now again, it's, this is a generalization. We know about generalizations, but I feel that the majority of the time, the most difficult game in a section is the third game. And they do that on purpose, again, because they're trying to stop you at game 3 so that the time issue prevents you from dealing with game 4, right? And so, yes, I feel same idea with reading comp, right? If you encounter things that you feel are really, really challenging or hard for you to process, especially now in the world of the digital LSAT, skip it. You don't need to worry about making bubbling errors. Move on to the things that you're more comfortable with, and obviously try to maximize the number of questions correct, right? So absolutely, I think that's a great approach. Question here from Suzanne. Did I hear you mention that in both reading comp and games, the third problem is always a time trap? So again, I wouldn't be able to say about reading comp. Yeah, for me, all the reading comp passages were challenging, to be honest. But again, I hope that gives you guys credit on my actual, or confidence on my actual LSAT is 3 questions on reading comp, and I was a double-digit wrong reading comp person all day, right? And so, how was I able to do that, right? And this is something you can obviously apply down the stretch here. Make sure that you practice reading comp consistently. Like I would actually suggest, try to do 1 timed reading comp section per day, right? Because I think what happens with reading comp is it's natural, right? I did the same thing. There's so much strategy for logical reasoning. There's so much strategy for games, right? Is a tendency to really focus your attention there, because part of you also feels like it's reading comprehension, right? Either you read and comprehend or you don't, right? But that's not necessarily true, because you look at me, obviously, when I was trying to read initially, I was not comprehending and getting a lot wrong, but eventually I was able to overcome that. And in my 7-month prep window, it didn't take me years to solve that. So I think what happened for me was, by practicing reading comp consistently, you really fall into a groove, right? You start to find the balance of, how much time you need to spend on the passage. Again, not to memorize it, right? Because there's no need to memorize it. We're even in a better place now where we don't have line references. They highlight the passage when it's something super specific, right? So it's very easy for us to jump back and get the context of something super specific. I think, reading for the main point, reading for the structure, right? Reading for comparisons, whether similarities and differences, right? That's really the main idea. And, this is an example that I use in the course, but I think it's really important to highlight what's happening on reading comp and what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to trick you. They're trying to confuse you. They're trying to use the density of the passage and the fact that it's on a topic that you have absolutely no interest in to confuse you, right? And so you notice that when you encounter passages that you have an interest in, they're a breeze. And so, I talk about this in the solitary passage lesson, I believe, because I do the same reading comp passage. It's the one about the wings and the dimorphic bugs and mating over different periods of time, whatever it was, right? Very technical science passage, right? And the way I would teach that is I would take a student, send them out of the classroom, and go through the passage with the class. And we would write really, really basic 1-2 word notes. And I think if you go to that video, you'll see the actual notes that we would try to get down, right? Very, very basic, right? And so a lot of students freaked out about the digital LSAT with, what am I going to do for reading comp? Listen, if you're annotating the passage where a digital LSAT is going to be a problem for you, you're annotating it too much, right? So I'm actually happy that the digital LSAT exists now to prevent students from doing that, because it's not actually going to be a productive use of your time. And then what I would do is I would call that student from outside back into the classroom, and without having them read the passage, I would go over the go over the questions with them with just what we had on the board, and they would get all the questions right. And so I think that's really important thing to keep in mind about reading comp, right? If you can focus on what matters, you're going to get the right answers, right? Don't get lost in the details of every tree. Stay above the forest, right? Focus on the things that we talk about. Again, if it's anything super specific, you can jump back. And I feel by practicing reading comp consistently, you fall into that groove. Remember, they're all must be true questions, right? So you have the luxury that you have on must be true questions, right? Which is one of the, in my opinion, one of the easiest question types on logical reasoning, because you have the luxury of being able to check your work, right? If you're picking something that must be true, well, show me in the passage where it must be true. Same idea with cannot be true questions. If you're picking something that directly contradicts something in the stimulus, well, show me what it contradicts, right? So same idea with reading comp. Yeah, Emily, exactly. And I think that, you know, why do we recommend the Economist passage, reading the Economist, is that idea of, you know, the Economist has that beginning section with that really, you know, broad range of articles, including a ton of stuff that you never would care about, and forcing yourself to read it and pay attention, I think really makes a big difference. There's one comparative passage. There's 3 solitary passages, 1 comparative passage. And, you know, for those of you who have ever wondered, why on earth is the free LSAT, the June 2007 LSAT, that's over 12 years ago, right? But the reason for that is that was the first time they introduced comparative passage. And obviously that's been the last structural change to the exam. And so obviously LSAC wants to use the oldest of those as a kind of a sample for students. But again, obviously it's a completely fine exam to use, as we've seen. And same thing with, you know, even the ones that go way back. A lot of students ask, you know, can I use the older exams? Absolutely, right? Just be aware that, you know, you have a comparative passage now. And you do see the frequency of question types change over the years. Like principal questions are a lot more common, right? You see that new question type on logic games that I feel is a really challenging question type, right? But you definitely see it in the newer exams where they ask you to suspend that condition and replace it with a condition and have the exact same scenario, right? Those are challenging questions. Those are new question types. So you didn't see those in the older LSATs. But outside of that, they are fantastic things to use as you prepare. National Review. So I've never read it. You know, I try to avoid the politics, except when I'm looking for flawed logic. Then amazing, gold mine, guys, gold mine. All right. Any other questions? If not, I'm happy to talk about some other things that I think you might find useful down the stretch here, or some tips and tricks that we can highlight. Maggie, great question. Great question. There have been. Now, the good news, or at least the reported good news, is that when this happens, so let's say you're taking a digital LSAT and it crashes on section 2 on question 7, and you had, I don't know, 28 minutes left to go. What happens when they give you the replacement tablet, it's allegedly and reportedly picking up exactly where you left off, right? And so obviously that is, if that ends up being the case, which again, we've had, you know, firsthand reports from students that this was the case. We've also had a report from a student who was adamant that, you know, they didn't get the exact time, but obviously that's not something we can confirm. But yes, unfortunately, there have been technical issues You know, I would imagine those will continue, but it seems like at least they figured out a way to try to get you to pick up exactly where you left off. Now, you know, so Salar, when you say what's the best way to get good at the digital LSAT, you know, I would say obviously, even though I obviously there's a bug here, and we'll definitely make sure we report it to LSAC so they're aware of it, because this highlighting thing is not working. But remember, you have these 3 digital LSATs that you can take on LSAC's site. You know, they're 4-section LSATs, which obviously is not going to let you do a 5-section LSAT, but you know, we're all LSATMax students, right? So in LSATMax, the way to get comfortable with the digital LSAT is, let me share my screen again over here. Sorry, guys. So in LSATMax, if you tap the filter in the top right-hand corner of the screen and go to prep tests, you can find all of the LSATs in the digital format. And guys, we are about to submit the update with 87 and 88. I don't know if they'll be live before next Monday. You know, obviously once we submit the update, it's not really in our control, but fingers crossed. But in the meantime, so you see all these other exams, and you know, one of the things, you know, if you go and you start the exam, here you go. Here's a digital LSAT, right? So this is a great place to get more comfortable with the digital LSAT. Now, if you're wondering how should I do 5-section LSATs, right? Because you do want to take simulated 5 sections LSAT. So I think on Monday, my recommendation of the last digital, you know, simulated LSAT, if you're wondering how to do that, just go back, right? Especially if you have the older ones, and just start by taking a section from an older LSAT. So I'm going to start by taking, for example, section 1 of June 1991, right? Whatever. I'm going to complete this section, right? And then once I finish this section, right, I'm going to quickly then go and launch my practice exam. And you notice by doing that, I'm going to have 2 more sections, then a break, just like the LSAT, right? So I just did 3 sections, break, and then the final 2 sections, right? So that is how to simulate the 5-section experience. But again, even when you're doing the individual sections the rest of the week, right, you should be doing them in the digital format. And if you don't have a tablet, LSATMax Online now matches the UI of our app, except, you know, the highlighting and underlining is not live yet. We are working on those. But as LSAC is clearly experiencing, is a little bit more challenging for us on the web than in the mobile app. But we will be releasing those features very shortly. But at least visually, from a UI perspective, it's similar, which will help you get more comfortable. So please, guys, make sure that you do not leave any surprises on exam day. Now, some questions here. Emily, what about the rumors of proctors with old exam instructions? So you're talking about, so I'm assuming, Emily, that was a rumor for October. Now, I'm really hopeful that that's not the case, right? Right, because yeah, you're correct. The new rule is that you can put the tablet in any location you want, and apparently the reason they changed that, it was the glare of the lights. If you can only lay your tablet in certain areas, was causing some problems for some students. And so hopefully they have got the proctors the correct instructions. But you know, listen, I just try to be professional, right? Try to, you know, there's no reason to get angry. There's no reason to get upset, right? All that's going to do is going to make the proctor defensive, right? Really just try to, you know, speak to them professionally, politely, you know, try to emphasize that, listen, you know, this is a policy that was recently changed, and hopefully they see the light. If they don't, right, again, these are things that are out of our control. And I realize that it sucks that some of these things are out of our control, but, you know, all we can focus on are the things that are within our control. Everything else, right, you know, just the only thing you can control is how you respond to it, right? And so, you know, really, even though I know how frustrating it can be to have proctors who don't know what they're talking about and who don't take their job seriously, right? there's no benefit in losing your mind over it. I think, go through the proper channels, make the complaints to LSAC, right? So at least they start to work to improve these things, which again, I do think that they're trying hard. But obviously, when you get rogue proctors, we had a rumor of somebody eating KFC during the reading comprehension section, a proctor, right? Which is remarkable. I mean, one of the rules is no food in the testing center, right? Why would the proctor think it's okay to sit there and eat lunch? But unfortunately, these things do happen. Suzanne, is there a special software that will be required to install to take the written portion at home? Not that I'm aware of. But to be honest, I haven't done a lot of research or thought about it because, again, as you guys know, the writing sample is not graded. It's not really relevant. Just form complete sentences, make a coherent argument, complete it so you have one on file because you can't have a LSAT score without it. But not something that I would really worry about too much. All right, Meredith, I have an issue with logical reasoning where I'm on pace for the first 10 questions and I lose a lot of time in the middle. Any recommendations for keeping up the pace in the middle? Do you have a summarized from all types combined? Action. So sorry. So also, do you have a summarized systematic approach when you do logical reasoning with all types combined? And in a rush, I try to apply the core strategy, but sometimes I feel, okay. Good question. So the question here is basically like, how do you deal with, you start off the section, you're on pace. As you start to progress, you start to fall behind pace, right? So listen, I think, a lot of students are of the opinion that the sections get harder as you go through it. And don't get me wrong, I mean, we've already talked about how they love to give you flawed parallel reasonings at the end of the section, and they're doing that intentionally. That's obviously a more challenging question type, right? But I think that if you took the section in reverse, right, you might not feel what you feel so adamantly, right? Because I think what's happening in addition to, yes, there's definitely going to be some harder questions as you progress, but I think what's happening is the time pressure becomes more problematic. And then, those things in combination, I think really exacerbate the issue. So my suggestion in terms of systematic approach, absolutely. Systematic approach is the following. Your time should be spent on the stimulus, right? And what that means is if it's an argument, we want to break that argument down, right? Remember, that's the key. That's what they're testing. You're talking to me about strategies about like, okay, once I understand that it's an argument, now the question is asking me to find, the necessary assumption, right? Strengthen with necessary premise. So my strategy is look for the question or the answer choice that not only strengthens, but also is necessary. But again, I think it's all coming back to your understanding of that argument, right? It's something that we talked about in our Q&A on logical reasoning, which unfortunately we had a technical issue that prevented us from sharing that replay, but we will be doing that again, obviously not before the November LSAT, but we will have a number of sessions on logical reasoning, so we can definitely hone in and focus in on some more of your problems. But from a general perspective, that's what I would focus on. My time on the stimulus, understanding the argument, right? Because really, I feel what's happening is as you progress through the section, students rush, which means that they're less likely to spend the time on the stimulus, which means they're more likely to not understand it, which brings them to the question statement and answer choices, and they sit there wasting more time, which again exacerbates the issue that you're experiencing. So I really feel by just really focusing on, the systematic approach of if it's an argument, identifying the conclusion, trying to identify the support for that conclusion, thinking critically about it. Again, that doesn't mean you have to anticipate the correct answer choice, right? Even myself, I read tons of logical reasoning questions and I cannot anticipate the answer choice, or I anticipate it in what I anticipated doesn't even appear as an answer choice, right? And so it's not about anticipating, it's about having a clear understanding of the argument and being able to keep that in your head as you move forward. In terms of reading the stimulus first, so again, this is something that we talked about in logical reasoning Q&A, we don't recommend that. And the reason we don't recommend that is it's not about this. I'm sorry, my apologies. We do recommend reading the stimulus first. We don't recommend reading the question stem first, right? Because the reason that we don't recommend reading the question stem first is it misses the point, right? It's not about the question stem, right? Whether they're asking me to strengthen it, weaken it, find the same flaw, point out the flaw in abstract terms, right? You notice all of these things are coming back to testing the same thing. There's something wrong with this argument. Do you realize that something's wrong with this argument, right? Because obviously that is, this idea of our being critical thinking attorneys and law students, right? That's the idea. So I feel that reading this question stem first is a gimmick trick that completely misses the point, right? Now, that being said, if something is a must be true question, right, that would be kind of helpful to see that, because you would know that you don't need to worry about, strengthening or weakening something. You're just trying to find an answer choice that's supported. But again, I don't think that really changes my recommendation. Again, for me, I never did that. I never read the question stem first. And I know there's, a lot of companies out there that recommend reading the question stem first. But, I just feel, again, it's missing the point of this section entirely. And so for that reason, I feel you'd probably see better results by just realizing that your time needs to be spent on the stimulus. Again, assuming it's an argument. If it's a set of facts, if there's some sufficient necessary, let's diagram it, let's move on, right? But if it's an argument, you definitely want to break that argument down. And that's another thing to keep in mind. Like, that trick of looking at the question stem for must be true is really not going to make a difference, because the majority of must be true questions are set of facts anyway, right? It's very rare that you see a must be true argument with an argument, right? So again, just something to keep in mind. So Ariane, in terms of how to take the written exam, so the way it works is it's completely separate from the LSAT now. So literally, you're going to show up on Monday, you're going to take the November LSAT, and then within 1 year of that date, you have to log into your account online on LSAT's website and take the written portion. So it's basically going to be a portal when you start it. It's going to have a timer, right? It's going to have you write your answer, and then the timer is going to end, or you're going to finish before that, and that's it. So again, not something I would worry about, not part of your grade, but it is something that you definitely want to something that you're definitely going to want to complete, because you won't have an LSAT score without it. Emily, there's something wrong with the argument. No, sometimes the parallel reasoning question. Sure, yeah, of course. You definitely do encounter valid arguments, but it's rare, right? Absolutely. I'm talking about from the majority of the questions that you're encountering on logical reasoning are arguments, and they're flawed. Absolutely. When you say you'll still have an LSAT score without the writing, would you be able to apply to law school though without the writing? That's what I'm talking about, the complete, oh, you can. Oh, okay, great. Well, that's exciting. Okay, fantastic. Well, again, I mean, from my understanding is the score always comes out. But if they emailed something new today, okay, great. Thank you, Emily. So here we go. Here's what LSAT sent today. It says, therefore, to help candidates and schools move expeditiously through the admissions process, we will be releasing scores for the multiple choice of the LSAT to you and the law schools to which you apply or have applied as soon as the scores are available, even if you have not completed your writing sample. This change applies to anyone who took or will take the multiple choice portion of the LSAT testing cycle, which began in June 2019 and ends in April 2020. Great. So great to hear. So I don't know, does that mean that they don't, I mean, so will they consider your application without it? I don't know, but that's great to hear. So Emily, I really appreciate you sharing that with us so we could get that information out to our students. And again, guys, remember, right, this is why it's important, right, that you used an email that you check when you created an LSAC account, because they do send these things out. We didn't get any notice, but maybe I missed it, to be honest. I mean, it's been a hectic morning. So again, I do appreciate you guys sending that out. Does the pen with the tablet let you write actual notes off to the side or highlighted functions? So Meredith, no, you cannot write on the digital LSAT, right? And guys, so, if you haven't seen our previous Q&As that we were doing just for everybody, we did 2 on the digital LSAT, including one that was before the June LSAT and then one that was after it. And so we talk about the change really at great length. And then, obviously with the September LSAT, we have a lot of students who were able to, with the post-digital LSAT Q&A, we had a lot of students who were able to report their experience to us, and we obviously talk a lot about that. But yeah, you cannot write on the digital LSAT. You have to write on the scratch paper, and that's why obviously with the logic games, why I feel it's the most challenging part of the digital LSAT transition is now you're using 2 mediums, right? You're doing your work on paper pencil without the shell of the game to keep you organized, but then answering your questions on the tablet. And guys, I'll try to find the answer to that question out about what that means for law schools considering your application without a writing sample. I'm assuming the answer is yes, they will, but let me just confirm that, and we'll get that information out to you guys. All right. Any other questions? We got about 19 minutes left. What else do you guys want to talk about? Fire away. Let me think. What else should we talk about? Did I reply to your 15 and then go back from there? No, but let me scroll and see if I can. Okay. I was always taught 15 minutes for the first 15 and 20 minutes for the, ooh, so, that's a good question. I remember that when I was doing it, I would feel pretty comfortable if I could get through the first 15 and be between, I think 15 and 17 minutes. And again, so I think it's challenging, right? Because again, we know it's 1 minute and 24 seconds, but it's 1 minute and 24 seconds on average, right? Some questions take less time, some questions take longer, right? And so, but again, I don't know if I would jump from 16 to the last one. Again, so, these are things that, again, I think it's all about, because so listen, you say you do the first 15, right? And then your question is, should I then jump to the last question and work backwards? And if the idea here is that the questions at the end are harder, I don't know if I would understand that, because then you're forcing yourself to start doing questions that are probably more time consuming, more challenging before doing 16, 17, 18, 19, which hopefully would still be pretty straightforward, right? And again, this idea that the location, and see, that's the thing. I can't tell you that question 16 is harder than question 26, right? I would 100% agree that the accuracy on question 26 is going to be lower than the accuracy on question 16. Again, if you were to remove all other variables, I think if you had the same question appear as 16 and the same question appear as 26, when it appears as 26, it's going to be less, students will be less accurate on it. And I think that's just a timing thing, right? And so, no, I don't think I would do that, Emily. Now, again, this is the beauty of practice, right? Why not try a few timed individual logical reasoning sections and try that and see what you think, right? If you find that it works, sure, right? Why not? But again, I just feel like I think it'd be better to continue to progress in order. If you encounter time trap questions or really challenging questions, jump them so that you continue to take advantage of the idea of all you care about is making the largest number of correct answer choices. But again, I do think that's something you might want to try. I never I never did jumps like that. My jump was, if I saw parallel reasoning at the end of the section, I would jump it. But again, see, I think it's all relative. I also didn't have the luxury of missing more than 10 questions on the entire exam if I wanted any chance to break 170. So it really depends on, it really depends on, okay, so Emily, because I'm wondering whether the old logic was, so again, I don't think, again, I still, I'm of the opinion that if you take the logical reasoning section backwards, with the exception of the, I think at the beginning of the logical reasoning section, you generally see some really easy questions. Now, that being said, I've definitely seen some logical reasoning sections where there's a challenging question in the first 5, 6 questions, right? So I do think they can appear at different places. I think the key here is just remembering that all that matters is getting the correct number of questions that you need for your target score, right? So again, that's another thing we talk about a lot with students who are dealing with time pressure issues, and they're saying, oh, I can complete the section and I'm getting 10 right. Okay, well, so my question to them is always, what if you slow down and you only get to 20 of the questions? If you end up getting 13 of those correct, right, you're in a much better place than you were rushing and trying to complete the whole section. And so again, this is, a lot of the reasons, we have the kind of outreach that we have, and we have the support that we have, is we talk about things generally, right? And obviously we built LSATMax from the perspective of, regardless of where you are with your prep, it's going to help you improve, right? And we've designed it thinking about students who want to break 170, right? But if your target score is a 150, I think it's a very different process, right? You don't need to be an expert on everything. You don't need to worry about things like flawed parallel reasoning, right? And so I think that's really important. When we say what's a good target score, well, where do you want to go to law school? We're not joking when we say that. And I think that's the key, right? Keep in mind, what's the goal here? What's the end game? The end game is get accepted to your law school that you're interested in. Obviously, if we can get a higher score than they're looking for, so we can get merit-based scholarships, that would be ideal. But I think it's really important to keep these things in your mind as you're progressing. So if you haven't done it yet, I think something that you'll find very beneficial is try to come up with a roadmap for the number of questions incorrect per section for you to achieve your target score. Because for me, when I had that, breakdown, anytime I took a practice exam, I could say, wow, I achieved what I needed on logic games. I'm missing 5 to 6 on logical reasoning. That's not working for me. And that's actually what led to my epiphany that I talk about in that struggling with logical reasoning YouTube video. It was when I got stuck in the mid 160s, it wasn't a question type or concept that was bothering me, right? But I couldn't get my number of wrong per section down from 5 to 6, and I needed to be at 2 or 3. And so that obviously caused me to really focus on that section. What's going on that's preventing me from getting down to 2 to 3? It's not a question type or concept, right? And what I noticed was it was the time pressure was forcing me to rush. And by rushing, I was missing the point, which was, these are flawed arguments. Can I understand that, right? And by slowing down, not only was I able to improve my accuracy and get it down to 2 or 3, but my timing actually improved too, which was crazy, right? This idea of going slower makes you go faster. But that's really what I experienced, right? And so I think, by having that kind of a roadmap for yourself, when you take your simulated exams and you review them, you can look at how you're doing. Obviously, the analytics of our app are amazing, right? Not only can you tell by section how you're doing, but also by subcategories, so that if there is something that's consistently giving you trouble, like let's say strengthen with necessary, okay, great. Let's focus in on that, right? And I think these sessions, right, that we're going to be hosting, that's really the idea. And so I think one of the things that we should talk about is how to make the best use of these office hour sessions that we're going to be hosting starting tomorrow until next Saturday. Again, I think, obviously these kind of general questions are great. You're going to notice that, not every instructor at LSATMax has the same opinion on how to approach certain things. And again, I think that's something to keep in mind, right? Logic is logic, right? But the tactics for you to achieve your target score can be subjective, right? And so I think, obviously, if you have any question types, concepts, right, in the sections that are giving you trouble, use the office hours to focus in on those, right? Obviously, if you have questions about strategy, what do you feel about, jumping around or jumping this, right? I think these are great things to chat about with the tutors. But I do think, try to get clarification on the pain points, right? Whatever's giving you trouble, whatever you're having difficult time with, that's what we're making our tutors available to you guys for. And again, I think really, I hope you guys understand that we're really proud of it. I mean, find another company that's going to give you 2 office hour sessions a day the week before your LSAT without charging you anything extra for it. And, it's the beauty of technology, right? Obviously, it's not one-on-one, and we do apologize that we can't do that. It's just the bandwidth, it would be impossible. But hopefully you guys find these useful. And then obviously we do have the private tutoring, right? And remember, we do have the promotion going on for November takers, where you can save some money if you wanted an hour or 2 down the stretch. And again, this is exactly what it looks and feels like that we talked about before, right? And if you look at the office hours from last week when I was working through the missing premise drills, you can see how we're able to share the screens and work through things. And I'm sure during these office hour sessions, when you guys bring up questions that might need some visual annotations, the tutors are going to share the screens and do the exact same thing with you guys. So we're super excited because, a lot of students, you see them on the message boards, right? But you don't see our tutors face to face like you do with me. And, obviously we've come a long way, and we have some really, really talented instructors who have joined our team, and we're really excited to make them available to you guys, because as you can tell, my bandwidth is limited. I can't be available for every session. But that's not going to stop us from continuing to help you guys achieve your goals. So let's get a few more questions in down the stretch here. So Sierra, if I were you, if you're skipping a game, I wouldn't worry about answering the questions, right? Because again, I think when people were probably recommending that before, it was because it was a Scantron exam, and if you made a bubbling mistake, that's the worst possible scenario, right? And if you were jumping something but then filling in answers, at least you would know that would prevent you from making that bubbling mistake. But I think in the digital LSAT world, the other thing that's really nice about it is it makes it a lot easier to guess at the end of sections, right? Let's imagine, let me pull up the digital LSAT again. Let's imagine I was at, so I got, 9 minutes left in this section, but let's imagine I had, a couple seconds left, right? And I needed to answer all these questions, right? Well, that's pretty quick, right? I mean, that's really, really fast compared to having to bubble in Scantron, right? So I think, given the fact that you don't need to worry about, misbubbling, and you have the ability to tap to get answer choices in if you run out of time, I wouldn't worry too much about putting an answer when you jump it. Emily, so I was stuck at 163 for a month with a minute or 2 time in each section except reading comp, unless there's a weird logic game section. I feel you on the not one question type. Well, Emily, I think something to take a look at, and let me just find it real quick. And I apologize if you guys don't recognize me in this video, because it was a long time ago, and I didn't have the beard. But give me a second, let me pull this. This was my epiphany on logical reasoning. And I think if obviously, let me send that in. If you have, especially if you have some additional time, right, I think you might want to consider slowing down, right? My gut tells me that if you feel me on not getting one type of question wrong, that tells me that probably when you're reviewing, for the most part, you understand your mistake. And that to me is exactly what I was experiencing. And by slowing down, you will eliminate those careless mistakes and actually speed up, because again, you notice what happens when you don't understand the argument, you sit there debating incorrect answer choices. When you can get it down to those two, you can't make the distinction. You have to go back, reread the stimulus, right? You're wasting a lot of time. Whereas if you spent that time initially on the stimulus, I think, yes, you definitely get to the question, stem and answer choices slower, but you're in a better position to answer the question. You quickly eliminate incorrect answer choices. And then obviously, when you get it down to those two, you're able to make the distinction. So Emily, I would highly recommend trying that trick out. It was really the point of no return for me. It took me from the mid 160s to the 170s. And, a lot of times I talk about, the exam clicking. I hope that my story shows you not only is it learnable, but there's a point of no return. And it was this subtle little tweak that unlocked it all for me. Because, I think it's a lot easier to see on logic games that every question is the same. All the games are so repetitive, but it's harder to see it on logical reasoning. But the reality is it's the same thing. The underlying logical structure of these questions is the same, right? What they're doing is they're using the imperfection of the English language, right? The way we can phrase the same logical sentence in so many different ways. And obviously, the time pressure to confuse you, right? But logically, they're identical. And so that's why I always say, obviously I had a tremendous improvement from 140s to 170. But if I took it today, if I took it tomorrow, if I took it next week, next month, next year, I get a perfect score, right? Okay, maybe I have to do some brushing up on reading comp, although now, I don't own a TV anymore, and I actually spend a lot of time reading. So hopefully that would have made a difference there. But in terms of games and in logical reasoning, I have no doubt. And I think that should highlight something for you. Again, I'm not saying that to brag. I'm trying to emphasize that there's something there, right? There's some pattern there that once it clicks, that's it. That's it. And if you think about it, like I remember where you guys are. I hated studying for the LSAT. I hated it. It was miserable period of my life. So think about somebody who felt that way about it doing LSAT prep for a career, right? So I just hope it gives you a sense of once that click happens, it's just so different, right? A lot of people ask me, how do you do LSAT? It's like once you get it, right? And it's so different. And yeah, again, another thing that I emphasized on the Q&A for logical reasoning is, I actually have a flip phone that I use on the weekends with the idea of unplugging, right? And I'm not preparing for the LSAT, right? And so I think, guys, getting away from the distractions, right, is a really, really helpful thing. Again, it's not forever, right? It's not forever. It's just for this short period of time. We're making sacrifices. We're putting our best foot forward. We're trying to do our best to achieve and unlock this goal. Again, something we always talk about is you really don't want the LSAT to be easy, right? You don't want the process to be easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? You want it to be challenging so that your perseverance, right, the fact that you have quality LSAT prep, right, really makes a difference, and it puts you at the top of the stack in terms of law school application. So I think that should probably do it. So we'll get one more question here from Joshua. Should one get easier reading questions first and save the questions that you have to go back to me? So again, I think it's all depending on your target score. If you can do these things and still achieve your target score, absolutely, right? I think the problem with the reading comp is you probably don't want to leave a passage and then have to come back to the passage, right? Because, right, I think, the one thing about reading comp is, when you're reading the passage, you're in the passage, you're probably a lot more qualified to answer even the challenging questions than if you leave that passage, go to another passage, and then come back just for one question on a previous passage. It's going to take you a second to get back to where you were with that passage, right? So I feel, from that perspective, I would probably say, sure, right, in the passage, right? But I wouldn't be, leaving one question with the hope of after you go through completely different passages that you're going to come back to and answer, right? And so that's it for today, guys. Again, I hope you found it super useful. Just a heads up in terms of tomorrow's session with Ravi, it is scheduled for 10 a.m. Pacific time. It's going to be on logical reasoning. Again, remember, Robbie scored a 180 on his LSAT. And again, he didn't start from there. And so come by tomorrow. We'll send the link out just like we did today. So bring all your logical reasoning questions and let Robbie lift the shroud and get you guys ready for November. So thanks again, everybody, for coming out. I really appreciate you guys joining us. I hope it was useful. And now the bonanza begins.